Good evening, everybody, and welcome to Resistance TV. It's Wednesday, the 7th of September. My name is Mandy Clare. I'm a local councillor and I'm a member of the Resist Steering Committee. And we're continuing with our Sex in the Summer series this evening. We've only got a couple more in the series to go. We were going to have Stephanie Davis-Arai with us this evening talking about school policy and council guidance to schools. But unfortunately, Stephanie's been unable to make it to the session with us this evening. So hopefully we can get her on another week. And in place of Stephanie, I'm really pleased that we've been able to have Simon Edge join us. Simon's an author. He's a novelist with a strong background in media and journalism and also in gay rights activism, which dates back through the 90s and the 2000s up to the present day. So I'd like to welcome Simon onto the show, please. Hiya, Simon.
Hello, thank you for having me.
Hi, great to see you. So if you could just begin by telling us a little bit about your background in gay rights activism, because as I kind of said in the introduction, that dates back quite a long way. So you're talking from a position of quite a lot of experience.
Yeah, no, it's weird. I mean, one of the things about getting older is that you realise that kind of not everybody is as old as you, and then suddenly you become a witness to what is history for other people, which particularly when people start distorting that history for their own political ends, becomes contentious and incredibly frustrating. But so my background is that I came out kind of around about 1990 in my mid-20s in London, and I was a journalist on a trade magazine, a business magazine, and I took quite a big kind of plunge, really. I went to work for the gay press, for Capital Gay, which was a newspaper in London aimed primarily at gay men, but also nominally at the lesbian community, and had been around since the beginning of the 1980s, and it was a free alternative to Gay News, which is the great venerable gay title. And it was given away free in gay venues. And it looks really tacky now because it was a lot of free ads, a lot of phone ads then, sort of before the internet. So it was financed by advertisers who wanted to reach gay men. But it was kind of the glue that held the community together. And by the time I worked for it, there was also the Pink Paper, which was actually a slicker outfit. And it was our more successful competitor, but we were the older title, and we were reporting, kind of what was going on socially, new club nights, but queer bashings and murders, but also and AIDS, obviously, but also the growing campaign for law reform, which had started, as people probably know, basically in 1988, when the Tories, when Margaret Thatcher introduced Section 28, it kind of went badly wrong because there was a backlash. For the first time, here was a law that would affect lesbians and gay men equally, and lesbians and gay men came together. For people like Ian McKellen, who had been sort of out in his own world, but not out publicly, it was a enough is enough moment, and Stonewall was founded. At the same time, there was Outrage, which was a direct action group, which was because it was almost the left and the right of the gay movement. Stonewall on the right, in wearing suits, and Outrage kind of behaving badly, doing things more likely to appeal to young people. And then gradually there was a program of trying to get the huge array of laws. And people talk, it drives me crazy now, people talk about the Section 28 years as if that was the only problem. Section 28, really, it was very insulting, but it was never used. There was never a Section 28 prosecution. I think it was a great worry if you were a teacher, but as far as certainly gay men's lives were concerned, far greater problems were the gross indecency laws, which meant that you could be arrested and theoretically jailed for outdoor cruising. It was illegal for more than 2 people to have consensual sex. So threesome was illegal. The age of consent was 21, which meant that 2 20-year-olds having a consensual relationship to men of 20, the age of consent only affected men, 2 gay men of 20 having a consensual relationship were breaking the law. It was particularly grave if you were, for example, if one of you was 22 and the other one was 19, then the 22-year-old would get in serious trouble. So lives were wrecked by this kind of thing. And the process of trying to reform it all was guided by Stonewall, who kind of said, what we need to do is to go out and to explain to people in Parliament why these laws are so inappropriate, why they're so damaging, and why changing them, reforming them, will not be a problem for anybody else, why it will not, cause any upset, any disturbance in society. And it was a long, hard argument. It's horrible, for anybody who was alive then, or remembers watching TV then. That every time one of these things came up, you would have the media balance. So you'd have if there was a Newsnight discussion, you would have somebody who thought that reforming the age of consent was a good thing, and you would have somebody who thought it was a bad thing, and they would either be a very right-wing Tory MP, or they might be a Church of England bishop, and nobody held back on the the language of sodomy and perversion and so on. So it was all pretty wearing to live through, but there were great, little by little, I say we, it was Stonewall, it was the campaigners who were achieving it, and people like me were reporting on it, but also the the active community was turning out in droves for demonstrations and to for any significant event. And gradually more and more people were doing what I had done and coming out at work, and in my case, Capital Gay collapsed. It went out of business, and I went into the into the main street, into national newspapers. I got a job at the Evening Standard, London Evening Standard at first, and then I went to the Daily Express, which was having a brief liberal period, but at the Evening Standard in particular, it was kind of tough times. There were not a lot of women in the newsroom, and there were even fewer openly gay people. And I was miserable there, I have to say. I found it was quite a shock to the system. And so, but what it wasn't just me that but it certainly felt like I was part of a pioneering generation where more and more of us were having confidence to say at work that we were gay, and we were, all of us, helping normalize the role of lesbian and gay people in society. And then what really changed things was the election of a Labour government with a massive majority, where it became clear that they were theoretically on the side of all the reforms that we wanted, but they took the time over it because they didn't have a majority in the House of Lords, and so there was a big Tory majority in the House of Lords. Every time you would get something through the Commons, and then there'd be a really horrible, nasty battle in the House of Lords, and it would be battered back again to the Commons, and it was kind of brutal to watch. And I do have quite a lot of sympathy for the trans people who are now saying that it's exhausting, it's draining for them to be an issue the whole time, that to hear themselves, that as they put it, their existence debated. And I can see that if you're just an ordinary person trying to get on with your life, then being talked about in the media all the time is not pleasant, you know. But you know, there are different. You know, I think the real difference is that we at that time were asking to be treated. We were undoubtedly second-class citizens before the law, and we were only asking for the removal of that second-class status. We were not asking for anything that affected anybody else. That's the big difference.
Yeah. Okay. So you're obviously, you must have a great fondness for Stonewall as an organization, given all that everybody's been through and everything that was achieved from that position of real grim, you know, discrimination and the threat of harm to one of acceptance. It's been a long journey, and they've really been at the forefront of it. So at what point did things change with Stonewall, and how did the T come to be added on, and what are your feelings about that? What's that experience been?
I think, to be honest about that anybody who tells you they were really fond of Stonewall in the 1990s, you know, certainly in my case, I used to hang around with Outrage a bit before it became Peter Tatchell's one-man band, and Stonewall was seen as very, very conservative, and they kind of dragged their heels a bit. So certainly I was quite gobby, complaining about Stonewall the whole time, because I thought, you know, under the last director, but two, I think, they were not always behaving in the most competent fashion. And so actually, I mean, it has really changed. That there certainly was a time when being rude about Stonewall, for example, Pink News, its unique selling point, you know, initially, its major thing was it was as rude about Stonewall when it set itself up as it is about J.K. Rowling nowadays, almost.
Right. Okay.
So I mean, that's a little curiosity of history that has tended to get a little bit forgotten. But then in the noughties, Stonewall, I think, did an absolutely magnificent job. It was run by Ben Summerskill, who's an old friend and colleague of mine, who was a really smart strategic genius, and basically they achieved stuff that we never thought would be possible. I don't think, you know, civil partnerships seemed, when you were simply asking for an equal age of consent, civil partnerships seemed way off. And to achieve civil partnerships relatively painlessly, that was one of the campaigns that happened more easily than some of the others. And then for them to go further, and what basically happened was that the Tories wrong-footed Labour. The Tories agreed to gay marriage, to same-sex marriage, pulling the rug out of Labour, which thought that they could use it as a sort of culture, as a stick to beat them with and make the Tories look nasty. And the Tories, and actually, we're all for it. So this gay rights movement, this lesbian and gay rights movement, had achieved in a very short space of time, so from 1988 to about whenever gay marriage came, 2014, had achieved way more than its founders had dreamed could ever be possible. And you know, this is the point at which you know, we can only sort of speculate as to what happened behind the scenes. I dramatize it in my novel The End of the World is Flat, which is sort of a satire. It doesn't have the word Stonewall in it, but it kind of it's not hard to know that that's what it's really about. That I think Stonewall reaches the point where, you know, if you have been a lobby group trying to change the laws, and then all the laws are changed. You've got a shopping list and you've bought everything on the shopping list, if you like. What are you meant to do next? And I know that there are certain people, Simon Fanshawe, who was a Stonewall trustee, I think at the time. He was certainly one of the founders. Talked about the internal conversations they had about the different ways that Stonewall could go. There were still some things to do. There were some reforms to tidy up, like in Northern Ireland, but there were also kind of stuff on the ground. There was still a lot of bullying in schools, and how would you approach that? But the terrain was no longer obviously legislative. The work was going to be other than just campaigning for MPs, to lobbying MPs to put through a law change. So you could do that. You could wind up your organization completely, or you could take on another agenda. And this wasn't happening entirely in a vacuum, because in the United States, the winds of change were clearly blowing, and queer theory departments were generating all kinds of stuff that we in this country had never heard of at that stage, or I hadn't anyway. And so suddenly this new set of new shopping list arrives, and Stonewall has a renewed sense of purpose. As we have seen, part of the point, I think, of the alphabet community, this ever-growing thing, which has surprised me. I took the view that lesbians and gay men would reject this ever-growing alphabet as just a nonsense, as exploitative, jumping on a bandwagon. Asexuals claiming to be oppressed, to me is an insult to those of us who actually were at threat of going to jail and had lives ruined and so on. Whereas nobody cares whether you want to have sexual relationships or not. But actually, I was proved wrong. It seems to have been, somehow Stonewall has sold it well, with the cooperation, with the very, very enthusiastic cooperation of what is now a large LGBTQ plus charity sector, and a media which now dances very enthusiastically to the Stonewall tune. The gay male community has completely bought into what seems to be the new queer agenda. And I think one of the ways in which that has happened so easily is that the media, as I said, the pink news that didn't only existed in the noughties onwards, I think mid noughties, I think, titles like Pink News need an enemy, and they used to knock Stonewall and so on. Having TERFs as an enemy, if you can have a go at Julie Bindel and J.K. Rowling, and the LGBT Alliance, that's much more. There's much more to get your teeth into, and clearly, an awful lot of, from what I can see, the full-throated, the gay men who are the most enthusiastic about rallying to the trans cause, and getting very red in the face about it. But are kind of having the time of their lives. That I think there is a good deal of this taking part in this vicarious struggle where you're the savior on the part of this imagined community of men who think they're women. It is it is a breast-beating opportunity, which has become a totem for gay male belonging. So you this as, I'm the wrong kind of gay man, and the only way you can stand up against this kind of thing, which has not involved very much sacrifice for me, because I don't get anything like the abuse that women get. But really, the price that I do pay is you are a heretic, and you get excommunicated. As it happens, I'm not bothered because I live in the country, so it doesn't make any practical difference to my life.
It's yeah, and I know what you mean, but at the same time, if you've, as a gay man, if you have experienced that, having been outcast, that feeling of having been outcast, from society at some point, to have an echo of that within your own community that fought for that space, that must be tough, I would imagine, sometimes.
I'm not happy about it by any means. However, I've seen, the difference. I was talking to some women writer friends about the level of abuse I've got compared with what they've had, and I actually felt really bad to be saying to them I've had 2 or 3 really nasty messages through my own website, and that's what they get in half an hour. So that there is honestly no comparison, and I think it amazes. I think it amazes both sides. It's a revelation to men to see how much abuse a woman can get for saying exactly the same thing as the man has got, and the man has got away with it scot-free. So, I think one of the things that I would say is that because the cost to us is it's not always less. There are some men who have been horribly treated, James Dreyfus and Johnny Best, and then Graham Linehan is gay, but he has clearly suffered immensely. But by and large, men get an easier ride. But yeah, the abuse. I mean, the other day I had a message on Twitter where my DMs are open from somebody who used to be a friend-ish, didn't know him very well, but we have long ago stopped being Facebook friends, and we don't follow each other on Twitter or anything. And the message was, "What on earth has happened to you?" Which I took as rude. It was a rhetorical question, I think, not he wasn't trying to engage. And he's putting this to me because I think it's a bad thing that kids who will probably just grow up to be gay or lesbian are being medicalized and persuaded they're in the wrong body. That makes me a bad person. The person asking this not long ago had to resign as the mayor of a London borough and as a Labour councillor for the amount of racist tweets that he was revealed to have posted. So, yeah, I'm not going to, you can maybe, if people who follow this might be able to guess who it is.
You're not going to stress about it too much.
I'm not going to name names, but no. I think it is extraordinary, the self-righteousness of somebody. Somebody who's had to resign his position because of racism is trying to moralize me. He thinks he's morally superior to me, and my crime is to have stood up for the rights of little kids who are getting told by a cult that they're born in the wrong body. So that makes me really pissed off.
Yeah. So, I mean, because through this series, we've been trying to unpick various different angles on this sort of trans ideology issue, because it affects obviously women's rights, it affects children, as you've just alluded to. It affects lesbian women quite profoundly as well, because if we're saying that gender identity takes precedence over sex, then same-sex attraction basically doesn't exist anymore. In the same way that if we're saying that anyone who calls themselves a woman is a woman, and should have all of the rights of women, then the category of women by sex doesn't exist anymore either. So we kind of, through doing these different sessions and talking about policing policy and talking about Drag Queen Story Hour and what else have we talked about? The silencing of people on the left, particularly women, but anybody on the left. And we've talked about women in prisons as well. So we've kind of covered the women angle. We've gone part way to looking at the impacts on children. But from that was what I was going to ask you more about, really, was because I know that there's an organisation called Gays Against Groomers in the States. And they were going to come on, and then I lost contact with them because their Twitter account just keeps getting deleted every other week. Yeah. So you can't, you're not allowed to be gay or a gay man and speak up on behalf of women, on behalf of kids, against gender ideology. But I think it's amazing and fantastic that they are doing that. They're taking a lot of flack for it. What are your, say, if you had like your top 2 or 3 objections to this ideology, what are the main things that are up front for you that concern you, that you tweet about? Because you've got a really big Twitter following and you're quite well known for your work and for your writing. So what are your main bugbears with this, as from your perspective as a gay man?
I think it's that I can see our history being stolen. You know, on this minor level, when people talk about LGBTQ history, and it just gets trotted out because journalists are frightened of saying anything else. And you know, you're talking about the criminalization of gay men by Victorian laws, and because I lived through that, that irritates and offends me. Because it kind of, it diminishes what people went through, and it angers me greatly to see that this is facilitated, this rewriting of history. There are plenty of people of my age and older and, you know, a bit younger who were also there too, who have every reason, you know, they were working as journalists, they were around then, they, you know, it ought not to be news to them that history is being rewritten. But have chosen to go along with it pliantly, and that irritates me massively. It doesn't affect, as I said, because I don't, you know, take part in you know, partly a matter of age and change in lifestyle and so on. So I'm not using the institutions of the gay community, and I no longer live in a metropolis. I think life might be quite difficult for me if I were trying to do that, simply because speaking out sort of puts a kind of target on your back, and you know, I just don't want to blunder into people having a go at me in the street or whatever. But I think that kind of a major motivation is also that, you know, one of the things that's thrown at us is it's a very familiar thing that gay men, you've got your rights, and now you're trying to pull the ladder up so that you don't want anybody else to have the same rights, because trans rights struggle is exactly the same as the gay rights struggle. That really angers me, because if anybody is pulling the ladder up, then it is the gay men who are enthusiastically embracing trans ideology. Because, you know, I was a pretty puffy little kid, and if I were 5 or 6 nowadays, I found a picture of myself looking, you know, I looked pretty fey. So if I was in the kind of school where Mermaids has got in and they've done presentations and people are looking for signs of, you know, whether you prefer to play with dolls or not, then I would not have a chance. My parents, who were extremely conservative, they would have no truck with this. So there is no danger of my parents, if they were alive, being the kind of trans housing by proxy kind of parent who think it's really cool to have a trans kid. So they would stand in the way and make everybody back off. But yeah, kids who are a little bit different, because the boys are a little bit swishy and the girls are tomboys, it's a matter of luck if they get through this without, at the very least, without this horrible movement messing with their heads. And I, kind of, I'm sure there's a lot of people, doing this podcast who know about the situation in schools much better than I do. I haven't got kids, and if people have, then they'll be much more familiar with it. But certainly I've got people who I know, and who are close to people that I know, where that there was a girl who decided that she wanted to be a boy, and at the age of 12, and in rural Suffolk, nobody should believe that this is just completely confined to North London or something. And the kids in the class are dead excited because it's drama. Teenagers love drama. They want to show that they're on the girl's side. That this is fashionable, and that to be part of this person's journey would be really exciting, so they can say that they've got a trans friend too. And those friends who are wanting to be part of the journey for the for the best of reasons, really, without any malice in it, but they're not the ones who are actually going to be experiencing it. When the girl in question eventually decides, no, she's going to leave it and she's not actually a boy, then there is a big wave of disappointment. And, so going backwards, it's not even detransitioning. It's just saying, no, maybe I'm going to change my mind. That's quite a brave thing to do, because suddenly you will find yourself much less popular than you were yesterday.
Yeah. I mean, I think as well, children, like you were saying, this isn't just in sort of London, but it's spread throughout the country, and all kids are online, aren't they now? All of them. So they're all sort of, there's a lot of children with mental health problems. That's kind of a real big issue for young people these days, and young people are online a lot. I mean, there's probably a relationship between those two things, but the likelihood of a kid being encouraged along that pathway is so much greater, once that they are online. And relationships between parents and kids when kids are teenagers or approaching their teens are difficult anyway. So like you were saying, if you had a parent, even if your parent wasn't the type of parent who celebrates having a trans child and sees that as something to push and encourage on, and your parents were wanted to help keep everyone at arm's length, that would then potentially have caused a big rift between you and your parents who'd previously had a really great relationship as well. I think that's one of the other things that really concerns people a lot at the moment. And certainly, because like we were going to have Stephanie Davis-Arai on tonight to talk about the guidance that's provided to by councils to schools. And I've just recently had a copy of our school's guidance, because I'm a local councillor, and I've asked questions of our council leader, and I've had sight of that guidance. And it is just mermaids, it's gendered intelligence, it's gyres, it's all of they're referenced as organisations for parents and teachers to contact, and there's no balance. There's nothing in there about Safe Schools Alliance. So it just seems as if all of the forces are pushing in that one direction, which I think you're right to be concerned about that.
And once a child is identified, once a child has come forward and says, I would like to do this, then because you've got the affirmation only model, then teachers are, whatever their personal opinion, probably petrified of saying doing the wrong thing. So are doctors. So certainly in the case that I was familiar with at One Remove, the single mother was pretty much the only person thinking, whoa, this is not a good thing, and was very lonely and isolated.
Yeah. Yeah.
And then did, Stephanie's organization, I think, was helpful. And, happy ending 5 years on. I met this kid this week, and she's now really well-adjusted, happy teenage girl, as far as I could see.
Yeah, I mean, I should add on as well. I asked a bunch of questions publicly of the council leader, and in one of the questions where I'd asked about our policy or guidance to schools, I'd also asked, would they be interested, would officers or the leader be interested in seeing alternative guidance from Safe Schools Alliance or from Transgender Trend or whatever, and they have said yes. So at least that door is open. So that's really positive. But in the meantime, like you say, teachers, parents, there's so much shame sort of plastered onto people if they don't just affirm and they don't just go along with it and they don't just go straight away for the new name and the change of clothes and all the rest of it. And how I was interested because you said that doctors and teachers are petrified of challenging any of this or questioning any of this or asking for a broader assessment for the child. I'm just wondering, what's your perception within the gay and lesbian community of to what degree people are going along with this because they are also terrified, because the ideology has been so aggressive and there's been so much shaming of anyone who doesn't go along with it and so much public attacking and denigrating of anyone who doesn't go along with it. Like, how much of it do you think is a genuine enthusiasm to have LGB and T all as one thing and to push affirmation only, etc., trans women are women, no debate, etc., and how much of it is fear of the repercussions? Do you have any sense of that?
My impression is that there are people who have a go at gay men like me on Twitter and say, don't you realize you're in the minority, and there's a tiny minority of people, of gay men, support the LGBT alliance. And yes, we do realize that. Thank you very much. I think it is because the media has made it very clear, the gay media, Attitude magazine and Pink News, but Attitude is the sort of glamorous end of it. And gay influencers, gay celebrities, Russell T Davis, Russell Tovey, Matt Lucas, and they'll turn up at the awards ceremonies in their dinner suits run by Attitude magazine and be on red carpets, and you get lots of easy applause by saying, yay, we love no LGBT without the T, we hate TERS, we hate JK Rowling. It's just the cheapest and easiest route. So if you want to be a member of the tribe, you will join in the chant. It's like supporting the football team of the city you come from rather than the one next door. I think that the people I know, I am tentatively contacted by people who can see me being visible, people I've known for years, and I find it, it's often the luck of the draw which way they'll go. I have been sent to Coventry by somebody who was a friend who was widowed not very long ago, and his husband was always liking everything I posted on Twitter. So these things cut through partnerships, so I think that there kind of is a social nervousness if all your friends are gay men, and an awful lot of gay people do live in a primarily gay bubble. If you've got any doubts about the way things are going, then you could either be like me and be gobby and make it part of your identity, in which case maybe you don't get invited to so many parties, or you keep it to yourself. And so I think the onus really, it's one of there's a number of gay men who do this in public on Twitter, and I I hope it's easier for us to do it in our own names rather than anonymously. And I think, the more it happens, and the more, kind of younger people than, much younger people than me, who are, much more engaged with other gay men who are saying publicly, no, it is actually okay to reject this and to say this is nonsense. I think it will happen. And when, as the battlefields change a little bit. So you talked earlier about lesbians under pressure, as the entire definition of same-sex attraction is suddenly brought into question. Clearly, for lesbians, this is a much more threatening issue, because there are men who've decided they're women, they've decided they're lesbians because they started out as heterosexual men, and so they're on the dating apps, and they are physically larger than actual women. So there are all I don't need to explain all is already obvious, that the vulnerability is so much greater for women. For men, if they are in that position, there might be possibly discomfort, there might be embarrassment, but I don't think there is ever going to be any sense of physical vulnerability, because men do not live in fear of being raped by women.
No.
But nevertheless, I think there is a growing sense of people who are keeping up with this, seeing that they're being told by extremely homophobic young trans-identified teenagers, you're a bigot if you're gay. We hate
absolutely.
And there are many people will either not notice that's happening, or they will laugh it off, and they will say it doesn't affect their lives in any practical sense, and they're probably right in that. But I think that as it comes closer to home, then I think a growing minority of people will say this is not acceptable.
Definitely.
At the same time, there's plenty of people. The expression, what am I trying to say? So there's something on the streets, turf in the sheets. On the streets, the Owen Jones thing, where you can do, of course I would have sex with trans men, and they
have to say that. He has to say that now. He has to deny his gayness.
Yeah, it
doesn't
just
he?
hasn't actually come up lately.
Yeah, that's where it gets. That's where the easy applause gets real, isn't
Precisely.
Yeah. I think that we're subject to that on the left as well. A lot of people, we've got an uneasy mixture of people who they're after easy applause, or people who are just afraid, and they have got concerns, but they're very tentative about expressing that, because they've seen what happens when you do. We're going to go to questions in about 5 or 10 minutes. The chat's gone off on some kind of weird tangent about whether you need to be married to have children. I don't know. Okay. But if anyone's got any questions about about this particular issue, sort of gay rights perspective and the same-sex attraction perspective, that would be really cool as well. So fire away with your questions. So yeah, I mean, I know someone, or of someone quite close, a friend of a child of mine, who is a gay young man, and he was asked whether he would sleep with a trans man, so a girl who's transitioned to male, and he said in all honesty he wouldn't, because he wouldn't find them attractive because he's gay, he's same-sex attracted. And he was basically told, he was thrown out of the band that he was in, and he was told, we don't have transphobes in this band. The college tutor, to their absolute amazing credit, despite all of this dreadful indoctrination that teachers and college tutors have been subjected to, said to him, and to the other people involved, you had every right to say what you said.
Mm.
And they really shouldn't ever have asked you that question, and they definitely shouldn't have been sharing what you'd said to them,
Yeah.
in confidence. So she stood up for that kid, which I thought was absolutely amazing. But I also know that there's, like you say, I know lesbian women who are on the major big lesbian dating apps who've been banned from them for putting in their bio or their biog or whatever you call it that they're women only, so they're only same-sex attracted, and they've been actually banned for life for doing. I don't know if people really realize, out there in the world where people aren't engaged in this, because I think once you do get engaged in this, you get everything thrown at you in the kitchen sink, and so you have to learn really quickly all of the intricacies of it. But people who haven't jumped in head first might not even be aware that that's how serious it is.
Yeah, exactly. And I think for a lot of gay men, I mean, the boy you're referring to, I mean, it depends on your attitude to life, on your mentality. That you could, he could have said, yes, of course I would. Of course I'd sleep with a trans man for a quiet life. That would be perhaps the sensible thing to do. And then and nobody's going to hold him to it. And there's perhaps the majority of people would take that path of least resistance. But some of us, through our makeup, are just too pig-headed to do that.
Well, then there's an element of coercion about that, and that's never ever healthy, is it? It's never right. Yeah.
And it's not going to end well, because the people being forced to lie and to say things that they don't mean, they don't believe, they'll go along with it, but this is not a solid foundation to build any kind of movement on. And
sorry.
Well, I mean, the one thing I haven't mentioned is in the way that it affects me as a gay man, is that I am concerned that this sort of mania, the cult, the everything having to be viewed through, the prioritization of LGBTQ plus services and so on, is going to backfire. And when, for example, kind of massive news story at the moment is that you can't, is that ambulances are sitting outside hospitals. And so they, mainly because there aren't the beds in the hospital, so you can't get the patient out of the ambulance when they get there. But there is a perception that if you call an ambulance now, it should have arrived in 10 minutes, but it'll probably take an hour and a half. So there is a perception there aren't enough ambulances. If you are a local NHS authority and you withdraw an ambulance in order to paint it in the Pride colours, in Pride season, as we're now calling it, then even if that's not actually affecting the way you're delivering the service, because the problem is the bed's not the ambulance, then the perception will be that a particular part of the community is receiving special treatment at the expense of the rest of the community. That's absurd. And even if it's well-meaning, it is well-meaning. It's a just implore these people, can you stop doing this? Because to deliver your services, which you are very good at doing. Everybody loves ambulance drivers. Nobody ever suspected that an ambulance driver was going to be bigoted, discriminatory against anybody, whoever they are. They're every bit as nice as they are on casualty. And so it's not necessary, and the consequences can only be negative.
Yeah, I agree totally. And you don't want to see a backlash after all that amazing work that's been done. I think that as well was a point that Gays Against Groomers had raised about what's happening with Drag Queen Story Hour in the States. Because they said that, early on in the gay movement, they would never have made a beeline for schools or libraries, because there were these myths around that were quite harmful, and for PR reasons that would not have been a wise thing to do, and that it potentially risks reflecting really negatively on their community and all of the respect that they've managed to win over all of these years. That people who are, because I was called homophobic for objecting to Drag Queen Story Hour. They had it as the headline act of the Family Day of Pride this year, along in Chester, alongside a Dolly Parton drag tribute act and a band called Booty Love for kids. It's like, so people are starting to see that that's inappropriate. There are some dodgy characters who are making a beeline for that and taking advantage of that to get close to children for the wrong reasons. None of that's going to reflect well, on the LGBT community. And men from Gays Against Groomers were saying, we haven't asked for this. We don't want this. We don't want this happening in our name. It's a lot worse than in America than it is here, but it's getting that way here too. Let's just very quickly, before we go to questions, talk about Twitter, because you've got a huge presence on Twitter. Twitter is a sewer, as we know. It's a double-edged sword, isn't it? Because we're able to use it to get quick messages out and to build up communities ourselves as well. But the big story that's broken at the moment, just thinking about backlashes, are the trans activists actually doing themselves more harm than good at the moment with some of the stunts that they're pulling, do you think? You know which one I'm talking about.
Yeah, so you're talking about the person who went to the Equality and Human Rights Commission with 60 bottles of pee. We are not told whose pee it was, but this person is a trans woman, poured a water bottle of pee on their own head, and I think actually peed on themselves while wearing a dress. And this was to get the message across that trans people are pissed off with the Equality and Human Rights Commission, which is, as we know, is the government agency which is meant to implement equality laws, which can be quite complicated because there are competing claims of rights. And they have actually, in the recent past, they have been pretty terrible at it because they have abandoned women's rights and belatedly, under a new director, have been more assertive. They're not enforcing it very well, but nevertheless, they are making the right noises, which has really, really pissed off these trans people, and they're showing how pissed off they are by pouring their own piss on themselves. And kind of you could so clearly, they took a journalist from the ridiculous Vice.com with them. And Vice.com is this, I don't know if it exists in physical form, but it's presumably not for the name. But they were the ones who gave employment to Ben Hunt, who was the BBC's dedicated LGBTQ correspondent, who, not quite certain what circumstances he left under, but he left the BBC after an awful lot of complaints have been about him, some of which have been upheld. So basically somebody who reported what he wanted to be true rather than what was true, and had taken paid gigs hosting Stonewall. Whoops, sorry. Okay. Paid gigs hosting Stonewall awards and so on. So he's now working there, and Vice.com has started breaking things that it calls exclusive stories, which is basically any trans person working anywhere decides to have a complaint about anything, it gets on the front of Vice.com. But they took along journalists as to report this exclusive story, thinking that it was some amazing coup, and just the response of the entire rest of the world is ew.
It's horror.
How could you not anticipate that? I think we were saying earlier before we started that I think this. It's one of the things, can I just show you that? It's one of the things that I have explored in my book, The End of the World is Flat, that how you would go about trying to, and I do it with, if you want to persuade the world by stealth that the earth is flat, but if you wanted to persuade the world that there aren't actually two sexes, that there are more than, that biology is a spectrum and so on, it's a very, very difficult task if you set out to do that. The people who superintended this strategy are people of absolute political genius who have done this, going back 20, 30 years. However, what their strategy does depend on, some really quite mad people buying into it. And so it means that the foot soldiers of this movement are their own worst enemies. And I think that's what we saw with that story.
They've possibly been off message.
Well, or nobody can see that the message. I mean, they're all in their own little bubble, telling themselves how brilliant they are, and they just can't see how badly the message is landing with the outside world.
Pretty horrendous. Thank you for outlining what's happened there. Right, so let's have a look. Kay Green says, "Hooray! Great book there. Has everyone here read it?"
Thank you, Kay.
Let's have a look what else we've got. Someone else says, yeah, someone had referenced the incitement to violence against Posey Parker at the Brighton event.
Yeah.
Someone had asked you the question, would Simon do questions for book groups? Now, I don't know what this means. I chose TWOTWIF for my book group. A lot of it went over there. You know that? Okay. The end of the world is flat. Okay, thank you. A lot of it went over their heads as they didn't know about Butler, queer theory, Denton's, etc. So she's asking, would you do questions for book groups?
Yeah. I mean, if my direct messages on Twitter are open, so if she wants to maybe drop me a line, I think it's a good one. So just to explain, that my book is full of in-jokes. And so it was written primarily to amuse people I know on Twitter, and you will get more out of it if you get the in-jokes. But I also live in a rural village where there's a lot of my friends are grandparents, and they're concerned by the insanity of the world, who understand none of the in-jokes, and they really quite like the book too. So what I'm pleased about is that it has landed quite well without you needing to know the in-jokes. But I get it is an issue.
I mean, Butler, queer theory, and Denton's, I know what they refer to, but the only reason I know what they refer to is through listening to Graham Linehan, because he's talked about all of those things a few times. So
I have to say, my book does what it does. Just to explain, that Denton's is shorthand for the report where we know that the founding fathers of this modern trans movement, where they all got together and decided how they would operate, and it was to be parasitic on the existing lesbian and gay movement, sort of cuckoos in the nest, and the report was written by solicitors called Denton's, which is why we call it that for shorthand. I in my book, I've got a sort of Svengali guru who is giving advice to the flat earthers, to the people who want to foist flat earthery on the world. So I've kind of dramatized Denton's. So you don't need to understand what Denton's is. The word never comes up. But insiders, the cognoscenti, will sort of spot that one.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about that Denton's is it is worth people looking that up, because all of these arguments about the equivalence between the trans rights fight and the gay rights fight start to fall apart once you understand really the differences. I don't think that the gay rights movement was ever looking to, well, they'd never stood outside the EHRC and poured urine over themselves, for one thing. They did not do that. But yeah, this strategizing that we're going to piggyback what we want on the back of an LGB, a law that's going to benefit LGB people, you know, that we're going to parasitically approach this, and that we're going to do that very consciously. That never happened in the gay rights movement, did it? There's no equivalence there at all.
No, I mean, there was nobody, even if you wanted to, there was nobody to piggyback onto.
Yeah. Okay, what do you think about the rainbowing of the police? Becca Firebird asks.
Well, I mean, exactly the same as you were saying about the ambulances. Just horrific, because firstly, the optics of it, that it makes it seem to ordinary people that the police are more concerned about one section of the population than everybody else. which they shouldn't be, and that will backfire. It's bad for everybody else. Because we should not be behaving like that. It's bad for us, for me as a gay person, because it will rebound. But also plainly, in when it comes to the delivery of police services, then they are not approaching their jobs in a fair manner, because we've seen them throw lesbians off pride marches with great enthusiasm, and it doesn't happen very much. But if you are the person who is visited with a knock on the door by an idiot policeman who has seen a sticker on their door or something and decides to read them the riot act, give them a lecture, it's sort of it's absurd. It's so trivially stupid when seen from the outside. But if that's happening to you, it's completely terrifying.
I think because we've got this collection of things happening within the police and within the health service as well, the change of language, the removal of women's words and all of these kind of things. Even though they may not be happening in huge numbers, and they might be, because it might be that the ones that are caught on video are the ones that we've happened to see, but the knock on the door might have happened to women who haven't managed to get their phone to record it, and have been traumatized and not really publicized what's happened to them. So I think that the more that women and the public generally see those kinds of things happening, the greater the risk that the rainbow comes to represent something just really oppressive and negative, and that has to be addressed. It's got to be addressed.
And also, I'm just one. I have a very close friend as a policeman, who is one of the sort of Twitter people behind them, and as a working police officer. This is a nightmare for him too. They don't want to be seen to be delivering services like that. They just want to be getting out and doing what police are supposed to do.
Yes, and to be perceived to be fair as well. It's really, really important, isn't it? I'm just going to ask you this question, and then I think we might have to wrap up. So Fiona English asks, I was going to ask you if you've become more involved with women, lesbians, and the women's rights side of things since all of this changed. But she's asked you, have you made new friends since all this has happened?
Yeah. I mean, massively. I mean, when you say, Twitter's a cesspit, Twitter for me has been quite sort of life-changing, because I have made new friends from it. Partly COVID, lockdown. I'm sure I'm not the only one who spent far too much time on social media during all that. But there's a woman who is sort of a Twitter friend and a real life friend, called Anya Palmer, who was the deputy director of Stonewall in the 1990s, and I had a direct message conversation with her on Twitter. I was following her and reading her posts, and she basically said, we desperately need some men and some gay men to listen to us and to stick up for lesbians, and to speak out, and that resonated with me. And so I, was when you first come to this on Twitter, people talk in lots of abbreviations, and there's jargon, isn't there? And what's GC and what's TW and what the hell is TWAM, and all of that kind of stuff. But actually, it's quite enjoyable for just to try and the mists rise eventually as you sort of work out what it all means. But certainly, it has provided for me an opportunity to kind of, it sounds sanctimonious, but just listen to women expressing concerns amongst themselves, and you actually, as a man listening to it, you learn quite a lot. Because I don't know how much I think straight men are probably much more attuned to how women, the problems that women face going about the world than gay men are. That gay men will kind of probably will have close friends with straight women, but the friendship tends to be all about the gay man, because the woman is not going to confide stuff about biology and stuff about fear of violence in the streets to the gay man. Why would she? She talks to other women about that. And so for me, it has been it really has been quite revelatory. Just listening. The most powerful thing is, that kind of the thing of why men aren't allowed into certain spaces, and it's not because all men are rapists. It's not because all men are violent by any means. But the crucial thing is that it is impossible for a woman to know which ones are and which ones aren't. That, to me, is the single simplest lesson that I've taken from sitting listening to women on Twitter.
Yeah, brilliant. Maybe what's happening will eventually at some point push us into a reaffirmation of women's rights, women's fears, understanding them better and shaping society in a way that sort of takes account of that more clearly. Because I think for a lot of us, outside of sort of working through individual traumas as they show up, I think for a lot of us, we thought this job was done in a lot of ways, and and maybe we haven't talked about our fear so much as women, or had it right at the forefront, because we haven't felt that our spaces have been under threat in this way for a long time. So it's made us maybe realize exactly how important those spaces are, and those issues how much they affect us all.
Certainly in my life, I've never seen it articulated so clearly, and that may just be because I wasn't listening, or I wasn't in the right place to hear it. But absolutely.
No, me too, I would say as well. Yeah, the same thing. So I'm going to say thanks very much to everybody in the chat first off. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining us and for your brilliant questions. I'm sorry we didn't manage to get through all of them. But also to say thanks to Simon. Thank you for your voice. Thank you for being on our side. Thank you for being present. Thanks for your amazing writing and your Twitter presence as well. And do you want to just show us the book again, so just in case anyone missed it?
Yeah. So it's called, did we mention it? It's called The End of the World Flat. It's kind of a satire on Stonewall. Whoops, there it is. And you can buy it in all good bookshops. You might have to order it, but it's on Amazon. Or if you order it directly from my publisher, which is called iBooks, so i-books.com, you get a signed one and a little badge.
Brilliant. Thank you, Simon. So yes, also please subscribe to our channel, hit the subscribe and hit the like and share, so that we can get this out as widely as possible. And we'll see you again next week. And thank you so much.
Thanks.